Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. This class is Work of the Heart, Reconnecting to Prayer with Miss Rachael Gelfman Schultz. It's the fourth session. It's about this class is on the topic of tefillah and how it is often a struggle to connect the words in the experience of tefillah. We're going to take a closer look at different services or sections or words of prayer in order to understand how they can contribute to our experience of prayer. We have the pleasure of learning for the fourth time with Rachael Gelfman Schultz, who is taught in several formal and informal Jewish educational settings, both in Israel and the US. For people joining in on Zoom and Facebook, we very much welcome questions. Please feel free to ask them in chat or unmute yourself and ask them on Zoom. If you're on Zoom, I'm going to be sending a round of panelist invitations to people who've just joined. If you accept to become a panelist, you can unmute yourself, you can ask questions directly, you can even turn on your camera if you're in a place where that's an option. If you don't want to and you prefer to stay an attendee, that's fine. Just use the raise your hand feature or ask me in chat and I can unmute you. Source sheets will be posted in chat for both Zoom and Facebook Live. And all I ask is if you're not actively speaking to please mute yourself. And with that housekeeping over, I want to turn things over to Rachael for some more Torah today.
All right, thank you, Kayla. Nice to see your face, Ellen. welcome. Oh, good. No, so Rachael Chaya, right? To remember her, right? Fernanda's really Rachael Chaya, yes. Nice to see you guys.
Hi, Linda. Oh, yes,
hi, Linda. Good to see your face too. Okay, so first of all, I want to dedicate this class to the memory of two soldiers from the community that we used to live in, Moreshet, who were killed. Unfortunately, the soldier that I told you about last week that was really fighting for his life passed away. His name is Na'aran Eshchar. And Yakir Levi, who was the 2 houses away from us in Russia, he was killed at the beginning of the war, only 20 years old. So Li'ilui Nishmatam, as we say, for their souls to have to go up, whatever that means, should be in their memory. I also forgot to say last time, so I want to make sure to say this time, that many of the sources, both from last time and some really from last time, also from this time, are from the Rosh Yeshiva of Maharat, Rabbi Jeff Fox. You can see, I think on the source sheet, there's a connection to his blog, and he has a really good collection of sources on tefillah, and specifically the questions we're asking about, like the structure, why different parts of the tefillah are where they are. So to give credit to where credit is due, I wanted to make sure to say that before I forget. But we will get also to a few of his words on some of the sources. Okay, so today our topic is going to be the blessings leading up to the Shema, the two blessings leading up to the Shema, and a little bit we'll talk about the Shema itself. Next week probably we'll do blessing after the Shema. That will be too much for one day. But before we get into that, there were a few things that I wanted to wrap up from last time that are very relevant to the themes this time. So the first thing is, who asked me? It's the person who asked me about Heschel's, I don't think she's here this time, but someone asked me about what does Heschel say about prayer in time of distress, since I had brought a source about prayer as a way of inculcating wonder, right? To make us feel wonder. And someone asked, well, what does he say? If that's what prayer is about, what does he say about prayer, when we're asking for things when we're in distress? So I found a source that I want to start off with today, because from Heschel, and I think it's the themes are going to, the reason I'm bringing it today is not only because it's answering a question, but also because it's relevant to our theme of these blessings leading up to the Shema, and the Shema itself, basically, just to give you a little heads up, we're going to be asking the question of what do the blessings leading up to the Shema have to do with the Shema? In other words, what's the connection between them and the Shema? And the answer, I think, will have to do with some of the themes, or one of the answers will have to do with some of the themes that Heschel talks about. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Does anybody want to read Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel on prayer? This is obviously written in his context, not in our context, so it's not exactly fitting, but a lot of it is. Yeah. Does anyone want to read it? Let's see. Anyone?
Yeah, I'm happy to read.
Okay, go ahead, Ellen. Thank you.
The malignity of our situation is increasing rapidly. The magnitude of evil is spreading furiously, surpassing our ability to be shocked. The human soul is too limited to experience dismay in proportion to what has happened in Auschwitz, in Hiroshima. We do not know what to pray for. Should we not pray for the ability to be shocked at atrocities committed by man, for the capacity to be dismayed at our inability to be dismayed? Prayer should be an act of catharsis, of purgation of emotions, as well as a process of self-clarification, of examining priorities, of elucidating responsibility. Prayer not verified by conduct is an act of desecration and blasphemy. Do not take a word of prayer in vain. Our deeds must not be a refutation of our prayers. Prayer is meaningless unless it's subversive, unless it seeks to overthrow and to ruin the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, falsehoods. The liturgical movement must become a revolutionary movement, seeking to overthrow the forces that continue to destroy the promise, the hope, the vision. Dark is the world to me, for all its cities and stars, if not for my faith that God in God's silence still listens to a cry. Who could stand such agony?
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, so we see here that for Heschel, the praying is, first of all, right, we're praying for the ability to maintain our ability to be shocked, right? We're praying, which I think maybe in this case, since it hits so close to home, is not so difficult, but still it is difficult maybe in, like he's saying, to be shocked at, for the capacity, it still might be true, the human soul is too limited to experience dismay in proportion to what has happened, right? So we're praying that we remain sensitized, right? That we remain shocked by the atrocities committed by man. And then he said, but he's saying, but it's not just about that, right? It's not just about praying to be shocked at evil, but it's also about praying as leading to action, right? Of course, many people know, I'm sure, Heschel's famous statement that he was praying with his feet when he did the civil rights marches. So prayer is very, very intrinsically connected to, and it even is a form of prayer, in fact, to protest evil, injustice, as he said, to be subversive. In other words, to destroy all the hatred and all, everything that's evil in this world, and to maintain hope, right? To maintain hope and vision and promise. And the ending also is interesting, that he's saying that it was also relevant to the themes that we're going to be talking about today. If not for my faith that God in his silence still listens to a cry, who could stand such agony? So on the one hand, God is silent in some way, right? He's saying that God in his silence, but he still has faith that God's listening, and somehow that helps stand such agony, that helps somehow deal with the suffering, the pain of witnessing, these horrible atrocities. So what I want to talk about today a bit is, or begin to talk about, I think an important theme of this class is also how is prayer connected to action, right? It's not, how's prayer connected, right? We maybe pray for half an hour a day or a couple hours a week or whatever it is, each person themselves. But how is that connected to the rest of our lives and what we do in the rest of our lives? So here he's claiming that something about prayer, about crying out to God and believing that God is listening and asking God to help us be sensitive to suffering, basically, to be shocked by suffering, human suffering and human evil, that ultimately leads us and should lead us to action, right? To examining our priorities, to clarifying what we're responsible to do in this world. So these themes are going to run throughout, but we'll keep them in mind for today. Okay, the next thing is also a bit of wrapping up from last week. These are two sources that we didn't get to last week, but again, are very, very relevant to what we're talking about today. So I wanted to make sure we didn't miss them. This is a source also from Rabbi Fox's shiur, and I wanted to read his take on it because I really like it. So this is a source from 13th century Spain, a bit Kabbalistic. And this is actually going back to our question last week, a different take than what we saw on the question of what role does Psuke de Zimra play in sort of preparing us for the Amidah, right? Why is Psuke de Zimra where it is in the service, and like, what is it doing? Like we mainly talked about Psuke de Zimra as praise before asking God for things. We saw also that at the end of class how Psuke de Zimra really actually is encompassing not only praise but all sorts of other emotions are also in there. But this is a bit of a different take. So someone want to read source 2 of Yitzchak Abuab, Menorat HaMaor.
I'll read, but I'm not exactly sure where you want us to.
Right here.
Oh, I found it written. Okay.
Yeah, that the songs of the Psalms, in other words, Psuke de Zimra, what we were talking about last week.
Yeah. I found it written that the songs of the Psalms are called Mizmorim, based on the language of the biblical verse, "You shall not prune, lo titzmor," Vayikra 25:4, referring to the prohibitions of the Shemitah year. And
right, so there's a play on word here, tizmor, pruning, versus mizmorim, which is what we call the different, chapters of the Psalms.
And according to this, the word zmirot refers to zmorot, prunings. For just like one who prunes vines has to trim all the branches, zmorot, and leave behind that which should become wet, so too the zmirot that we recite before tefillah are meant to remove and cut off all the stumbling blocks and sins that stand in the way of God, so that when our prayers reach God, they will be heard and be desired by God.
Okay, so tefillah here, he means tefillah as in the Amidah, right? But the reading these chapters of Psalms is somehow preparing us for the Amidah by pruning away all these stumbling blocks and sins that stand in the way. So how do you guys understand this? What is he saying? How does Psuke de Zimra help it prepare us for the Amidah? What is it doing?
It helps us to focus more.
Yeah, exactly.
And not be so distracted.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I would read it. And that's how we'll see in a minute Rabbi Fox reads it also, right? Because that's a very, very challenging thing, obviously. Prayer is to focus. And he's saying, that this is like a time in which we have, like someone asked last week also this question of, why do we have this long Psuke de Zimra? Why can't we just have if all we're trying to do is praise God before we ask for things, then we could just have that the first blessing of the Shema, which is also about praising, as we're about to see, is also about praising God for creating this beautiful world. So we don't need all these different things, right? But he's saying like it's a process of getting into the prayer, right? It takes time to really focus and to be present. And that's what we're doing during Pesukei Zimra, is we're sort of like working and practicing before the actual Amidah. So I really liked how Rabbi Fox put it here. I'll read it. One of the greatest challenges to prayer today is our inability to truly focus, right? Just like Linda said, on one task at a time, kavana. Even as I am writing this essay, I have 10 other tabs open on my computer. Pruning away extraneous thoughts, ideas, and tabs is not simple. For these mystics, Pesukei Zimra offers us a few moments of pruning every single day. Learning to be in the moment and not pulled by our phones, our email, or our next appointment is a lifelong goal. This is true for counselors, teachers, parents, and rebbeim. We all know what it is like to be truly listened to have someone give you their complete attention, even for only a few minutes. Practicing that skill with God helps us to be better listeners for our own friends, students, and children. Developing the ability to be truly present for another does not happen on its own. It requires time and training. For the Shari Ora, which is another commentator who he quoted, which we went in a similar direction, and Minorat HaMeor, Pesukei Zimra is a daily practice that helps cultivate this essential spiritual life skill. So what I really liked here is how Rabbi Fox connects this practice of trying to be fully present and listening in prayer to being fully present and listening to the people in our lives. That somehow through prayer, we can practice this very, very difficult thing of being fully present and focusing, and that can transfer over and be used for, that skill can be used in all aspects of our lives. And it's such an important skill. So this is really where I want to be going also in this direction. I'm thinking about the blessings before the Shema, is this question of sort of cultivating our being fully present, and how that's not only about having that skill in prayer, but also using that skill with other people. And ultimately also I would add that as as we'll see, can help us with the action, right? If we're fully present and listening, that can also help us act. I mean, that in itself is an act, right? But it can also help us know what to do to help people. Okay, so it was a very long introduction, but okay, but now we're going to start the actual topic, though these are all connected, of the blessings before the Shema. So the first blessing before the Shema that we have is blessed are you, Hashem our God, King of the universe, former of light, creator of darkness, maker of peace, and creator of all things. Okay, and then it goes on. So just looking at this, like, what does it have to do with the Shema? What are your ideas? Why is this at this point in the service? And you could say it's totally unconnected, but I don't want to say that it's connected. Jewish meditation, Alan, you're saying that in terms of the being present. I just noticed that. Yeah, anyway. So what is this blessing? Any ideas how this blessing is connected to the Shema? Why it's necessary as a preamble to the Shema? Yes, my mom. Yeah.
This blessing is saying that God is responsible for the whole. I mean, Shema is about being one and whole, and they're saying not only the light, but also the darkness. It's
exactly
everything.
Right. God, yes, exactly. If God is one, then that means, right, that God has to be both the creator of the light, the former of light, and the creator of darkness. Yes. Okay. Yes, we're gonna read more about that in a second. But yeah, exactly. And at the time of the Gemara, also there were the dualists, right, believed the opposite, right? That there were, that the good and evil were two different deities. So this was like a real, a live argument also in that time. anything else that people, any other ideas that people want to add of the connection between this and the Shema?
I actually have a question. I just
Mhm.
pulled it up. I opened the Siddur app.
Mhm.
I was thinking, I mean, I always connected it, and I'm not sure if it's right. So that Yotzer Or comes right after the Baruch Hu. That's where I always put it.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I need to think about where I think it should be, where it speaks to me, what it's saying based on where I connect it.
Explain more.
No, I just never, I just started thinking about it 37 seconds ago. So I have no idea where we're
Yeah. In other words, where does it make sense? I mean, it is a lot of the themes that we saw earlier, though I do think, like what my mom pointed out, of like specifically this theme that God is both the creator of light and the creator of darkness is new. But right, so why is it here? Yeah, that's the question that we are going to, and yeah. Okay. So first, along the lines that my mother was going in, so the original verse that this comes from is, I form the light, and this is from Isaiah. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Hashem, do all these things. So what is the obvious, what did they do to this verse? What's the change that they made here? The people who wrote the Siddur?
Well, it's not God speaking directly. It's they're reframing
that's
what God
right.
is saying. Okay,
Okay.
right, I'm just saying.
Yep.
And they're
Okay,
talking
that's-
about evil. They didn't talk about evil specifically in the other one.
Exactly, right? The other one said, I make peace and I created all things, right? Not evil. Yeah, Nancy, did you have something to add, or is that what
Yes, I was going to say the exact same thing. Yeah, the evil was omitted.
Yeah, which is big.
Yeah.
Right? Especially considering, I don't actually think that this next source in the Talmud even fully answers the question, but especially considering if the point is, as my mom was arguing, as I would tend to agree, that like it's about God being the source of everything, that we have one God is the source of both goodness and evil, light and darkness. It's a strange, it's a change to make. Okay, so the Talmud obviously notices this question, that they sort of ask it from a different perspective. So does someone want to read the passage from the Talmud? From what is the bracha, or what is the?
I'll do it. What is the bracha? Rabbi Yaakov said in the name of Rabbi Yoshia, Yotzer Or Uvarei Choshech. God creates light and fashion darkness. Let him say, God, who creates light and fashions brightness? No God. We say the blessing as the verse is written in the Bible. But if so, do we say, I make peace and fashion evil, as it is written in the Bible? Rather, it is written, creator of evil, as we euphemistically say, creator of everything. Here too, let us euphemistically say brightness, Noga, instead of darkness. Rather, Rava said the reason we recite who creates darkness is in order to mention the attribute of day at night and the attribute of night during the day.
Okay, so what are they? So, I mean, first of all, they are saying that basically, right? Why according to the rabbis here, do we say, instead of create evil, create everything? Yeah, it's a euphemism, right? They're saying this is a euphemism, but when it came to Yotzer Or V'Choshech, they didn't want to say a euphemism. And why? What was the point? Like, they didn't want to just say, and fashioned brightness, Noga, right? They said instead, it's in order to mention the attribute of, Rava said, right? It's in order to mention the attribute of day at night and the attribute of night during the day. Like, what does this mean? Any ideas what Rava is trying to say here? In other words, why didn't they just also say a euphemism regarding lightness and darkness? Anyone have ideas?
To me, it seems to be trying to avoid that dualism again, that there's always some darkness in the light, and there's always some light in the darkness, which again, as you keep alluding to, I mean, it's, the times like this, it's really hard to get out of the dualistic kind of thought.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And he's saying, no, even in the darkest times, there's light, and the opposite, right? In the lightest, happiest times, there's also darkness, right? Like, like a classic example is like at Jewish weddings when we, break the glass in memory of the temple being destroyed, right? Like even the darkest times, there's light. Yeah. And even the darkest times there's light, even the lightest times there's darkness. Yeah, Ellen, what did you want? You had your hand up?
I was just thinking to create an awareness, because if in the light, if somebody said God creates light, you might not even hear it. It could be obvious, but if somebody said something that you're not looking at, it might increase your awareness.
Increase your awareness of God creating darkness. You're saying that's less obvious. You're saying then.
Yeah, that there's an intentionality.
Right. I mean, it is less obvious because also, if you think about it, like what was there before light? It seems like there was, I don't know. It's hard to know. What is this tohu vavohu? I don't know. Like, I would sort of imagine it was dark and then God created light, right? So it doesn't seem so intentional. But maybe not. I don't know. We don't really know. I mean, yeah. I mean, it talks about darkness.
I just want to put out a comment in chat where it said, I have a sitter in Portuguese where the translation ignorance, not darkness.
Very interesting. I think that's definitely not the literal translation, but that is very interesting. But it's a metaphor, what are we talking about? We're not only talking about actual light and actual physical darkness. So that could be, I guess, another metaphorical interpretation that's very interesting. I think also, by the way, there's also a very literal level of this where it's just saying, like, right now it's the morning, it's the light, and we want to mention the night, even though it's the morning. And so too, in the morning we want to also mention, and in the night we also want to mention the morning. But that's like the literal. I mean, I think that's a literal level. But
Great.
Yeah, Nancy, good.
I just think it's interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it, but like the forming the light and making peace, but creating is only with the negative, the darkness and the evil.
Yeah,
I don't know if
that's a very
that's
interesting point. I don't know. That's a really good question. Yeah, I don't know. To think about that one. That's a very good question. Why is the word create?
Sorry, what was the question? I'm interested. What was the question?
Yeah, so what Nancy was asking is, like, if you look in the Hebrew, right, it's, or even in English, but it's in Yotzer Or, that we form light, right? Uvorei choshech, and create darkness. Oseh shalom, that God makes peace. Uvorei, creates evil. So the Hebrew verb borei, create, is only used regarding darkness and evil, whereas the light and the peace get other verbs of do and
that makes sense.
And
for me. That would make sense only
if,
from the point of view of if you're beside Hashem, right? You are in the light. So I create the darkness by going away from him. Therefore, I don't know. I'm just literally.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like when God, right, like the Kabbalists talk about how God has to do tzimtzum, he has to contract in order to create the world, right? So by that sense, I guess it's actually the opposite of what we were saying. It's like maybe it's more like the world was all light, and then God had to contract to create the darkness. I don't know. That's an interesting point. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that idea. Okay. So Maharal has an interesting take on this Gemara. Someone want to read the Maharal?
I can read it for you. Rachel.
Go ahead.
Okay. And therefore we must mention the aspect of day at night and the aspect of night at day. For the day demands that the night comes, and the night demands that the day comes, and neither one can exist without the other, for both of them complete the other until both of them are one day. And if you were to mention the day without the night, or the night without the day, it'd be an inappropriate half praise of God. And also because the night and the day are one, and this teaches us the God who created them both is one.
Right. So that ending point is getting back to my mom's original point of how is it connected to the Shema? Because God created both night and day. And what's the first part saying? He's saying, if you were mentioned to mention the day, right, you can't have one without the other. They complete the other. So what is he trying to say there? Right? If
there's a yin to his yang, I mean, like,
yeah, I mean, also like
you can't have light without darkness, or either or, I guess.
Right, or good without evil.
Yes.
Right? There's no meaning to goodness without evil. There's no, the definition, the category has no meaning, one without the other. There's no meaning of night without day. There's no meaning of day without night, and same thing with good without evil. So that's like a direction we haven't gone in yet, but also important to keep in mind. That's like the very idea of goodness like doesn't even really exist without evil. And same thing, light without darkness. Okay, so I wanted to finish up this part of our learning with Rabbi Fox, what Rabbi Fox said on this, which I also really liked. Sort of going in the direction I would say of what my father was saying, that it's a very important message right now. You want to read it, Dad? You want to read it since it's very much going in the direction of what you were saying?
Built into the structure of these blessings is a religious desire to show that God can be found both in the day and the night. God is present both in our moments of great joy as well as deep sorrow. A central message of prayer in general, and this section in particular, is to learn to see the light in the darkness and to always be aware of the darkness and the light.
Yeah, okay. It's a good summing up, and very much along the lines of what you said, that to always be aware of the light and the darkness and the darkness and the light, and that God is present in both, right? Because ultimately we're leading up to the Shema. So we're talking about how do we perceive God's presence, and that to try to find God's presence in both the moments of great joy and deep sorrow, as we do in many ways, like through our ritual. Okay, any comments? Yeah.
Can I make a comment about going back to Heschel at the very beginning? Who uses, I believe it was in his reading where he mentions the word faith. And
the last line, if not for my faith, that God in his silence still listens to a cry, who could stand such agony?
Right, and it strikes me, I always have trouble personally with the word faith, and it's so often, often we use the word faith simply to characterize a religion. It's sort of a substitute for the whole thing, and but it's also often used sort of as we think of it as blind faith, which is almost the opposite of what Heschel and what we've been talking about through this hour, is that that commonly you think of faith as being only looking at the good and being the passive acceptance of good, whereas this is a much more active kind of faith, where you are asked to confront that there's both good and evil, that there's both light and darkness, that and somehow to work with that and to work with it to some Heschel sort of is looking at a kind of an improvement, I guess, if you will, an aspiration, but it just strikes me that this is a very different kind of faith than I think we use the word in common parlance.
Mm-hmm. Right, faith is not just about like seeing the good and hoping and believing that everything's going to be all right, and in a passive way, right? Faith is really, I mean, really for Heschel, faith is about confronting suffering and feeling the suffering in the world. And once we do that, like once we fully feel, like we can never fully feel, but once we are present and feel that suffering and feel the evil that's going on, that will make us act. Right? It's a very active kind of faith. Yeah. Yeah, and that should be the goal of sensing both, of feeling strongly the good and the evil, or the light and the darkness. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, like that connection back to Heschel. Yeah, Nancy.
I was just going to say with Fox's interpretation, or whatever you want to call it, that he uses the word sorrow versus evil. Joy versus sorrow versus, good and bad. I'm not sure I agree with that, but the great joy will be as well as deep sorrow. He sort of takes out the evil piece that had been brought up in your past text.
Right, which is more challenging in some ways, the evil, right? Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
deep sorrow, there's things that you have sorrow about, but not necessarily are evil things. Like it's a totally different concept to me.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? Like when we're mourning, right, and we, there's so many important, helpful Jewish rituals in death, but death is not always evil. Sometimes it can be, the end of a long life, someone dies, and it's still very sad, but it's not the result of any evil. It's like, and it's not even, right. It's true. It's another level, really, to see God in the evil. Meaning that's a much more difficult challenge.
Exactly. I feel like
I don't know, like exactly even how to put it, right? Like it's yeah.
Well, I think we're really have experienced evil in a different way than many of us ever experienced before over the last few weeks. So if you ever wanted to concretize what does evil look like, I think we can see what evil can look like, and it's very frightening and scary, and it kind of overwhelms you. So it puts you in a whole different perspective, evil versus sorrow. Unless you've experienced it, I think you really want to step back and say, well, maybe they didn't mean it, or something. It wasn't meant to be. But when you see its stark reality, it's pretty frightening.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and what do you do with that religiously, I guess is the question, right?
Yeah.
It's very hard to, in other words, to believe that also in some way came from God and it's all for the best is like, it's a very hard thing to believe. I don't even know I don't even know like that you have to go there, it's all for the best, like, but to say that, I don't know, like Heschel is saying that we're like praying to God even to be shocked by the evil, which, like, I don't know, is so difficult this time, but and to do and to be motivated to do something at it, like to listen to the suffering, to hear the suffering, to be shocked by the evil, and to act, like to do something about it. It's hard. Hard questions. I don't know the answers. But it definitely comes to life in a different, and it is interesting that's the piece, right? That is the original Isaiah, is God creates evil, and that's the piece that they've taken out of the liturgy, and that's the most difficult, the most challenging part, to see God as creating evil.
I have a question. Who took it off of the liturgy?
Know
anything about
I mean, this is a passage from the Talmud, so
right. So why
seems already by the Talmud, right? They already had this blessing of, as we have it,
As you
right?
have it, okay.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly.
Yeah. No,
Hard to know exactly when it comes.
but more or less.
There is another conversation which I didn't bring up here, but that some of these blessings, that perhaps this blessing, it's not entirely clear, was said during the time of the temple, at the temple, it was said. Not clear whether it's this blessing or the next blessing, but the next blessing that we're about to look at, but one of these at least was said in the time of the temple. So it's very old. Yeah, I don't know exactly who was the first one to say it, or was it, I don't know, but it goes back probably to the temple times. So, yeah. Okay. So before we go on, we're running out of time, but I wanted to also look at the second part of the ending of that blessing. There's a bunch in the middle that we skipped, but the ending of this blessing is also very relevant to our conversation, but also adds in some other themes. Someone want to read? This is the last paragraph of that blessing, right? That was the opening of the blessing, and then there's the part with the angels, which is also very interesting, but we're not going to go into it right now. And then this is the last paragraph. Someone want to read? To the Blessed Almighty.
Sure.
Yeah.
To the Blessed Almighty, they offer pleasant melodies. To the King, the Almighty, who's living and enduring, they utter hymns and make praises heard. For he alone is the performer of mighty deeds, maker of new things, master of battles, sower of acts of righteousness, causer of deliverance to sprout forth, creator of cures, awesome in praise, master of wonders. He renews in his goodness each day continuously the work of creation. As it is said, give thanks to him who makes the great luminaries, for his kindness is everlasting. Shine a new light upon Zion, and may we all soon be privileged to enjoy its brightness. Blessed are you, Hashem, former of the luminaries.
Right, so the ending of the blessing goes back to our theme before of blessing God as the creator of light, the luminaries, the sun and the moon, right? But this paragraph is not only about God as the creator of light and darkness, or even God as creator per se, right? What themes do we add here, and how might they help us understand this question of how is this blessing and this passage preparing us for the Shema? Anyone? And there's what new themes are in this paragraph, and how, and you can answer just that question. And if you want to add anything, you could also could be also the further question is, how are they relevant to the Shema or connected to the Shema? Yeah, Ellen.
Well, that creation wasn't just a one-time event, that exactly. The world needs to be sustained every second.
Exactly, right? He renews in his goodness each day continuously the work of creation, right? It's not like the watchmaker, God, right? We look at it really that God, like every moment, is sustaining creation. Yeah, okay. And how would that be? Any ideas how that would be relevant to the Shema, to preparing us for the Shema? Someone else can answer too. And Ellen, you can answer, or somebody else if anyone has an idea.
God's the only one that's responsible for that can, that does, that will sustain the world.
Okay. Any other ideas of how it's connected, or also new ideas that come up here?
Well, it's like God is all powerful. He does all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, and how is that connected to the Shema?
Because if God is one, he must do everything. But also this thing that I noticed was he's talking about master of battles. So that kind of gets into the evil. Like,
yeah, exactly. That's very...
There's some evil thing happening and you're trying to fight against it. So it sort of includes that, which was interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting, right? It's not like we look at this blessing as about sort of God as creator of nature for the most part. And then there's this series of of actions that God does, right? Mighty deeds, maker of new things, master of battles, which is very relevant, like my mom said, to this conversation we're having now. Sower of acts of righteousness, causer of deliverance to sprout forth, and creator of cures. So it's like all these different ways, right, that God intervenes in creation, including even battles, right? So
But these are also all positive things, right? That's only the good things. Like
right.
that's kind of leaving that.
Right.
The,
His
you know, the
kindness
blessings,
is
remembering
everlasting.
all the good things, and then we're going to go on to, the praise.
Right. It's like he created everything. Yeah. That's true. That's an interesting point. Yeah.
And the
Also,
sower.
Rachel,
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I was going to say the sower of acts of righteousness sort of ties into the Heschel thing that
Yeah.
God causes us to feel indignation so that we then go and do something about the evil stuff that's happening.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. And I don't know why I was never reading it that way before. Right. Sower of acts of righteousness. You could look at that. Like, I think the way I had always thought about it was that God himself does acts of righteousness. But you're saying he's the sower of acts of righteousness in us.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great, yeah, that's excellent. Yeah. Right, that God is inspiring us to do acts of righteousness, which you could look at as like that's what he's saying by sower, or even if we're saying that God himself does acts of righteousness, it's our job to emulate God, right, and also do those acts of righteousness. But I really like that idea of sower of acts of righteousness, that God sows the acts of righteousness in us. Yeah, Dad, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, just to add to it, that I mean, it's almost this entire list is like that. That that it's not so much that God directly causes all of this whole list, but that that he's Zoreat's code. He sows righteousness. He causes deliverance to sprout forth. Is the translation there? He creates. What do they call it? Cures. This entire list. It's he's sort of the spark.
Yeah, that's a really good
necessarily
point.
The direct cause.
Good. Yeah, that's a really good point, right? It's not saying that God cures. It says God creates the cures, right? We are the ones who have to use them. We have to, right? Or same thing maybe with the causer of deliverance, right? He's the causer. He doesn't deliver. There are places in liturgy, and in the Bible that we talk about God as the deliverer, but here he's saying, here the liturgy is saying the causer of deliverance, which again, right, there could be God's causing us to redeem, deliver people from suffering, oppression, whatever. Maker of new things, all of them. Yeah, that's a really good point. That God as giving us the inspiration, tools, however you want to look at it, to do these things, and also do these things in emulation of him. But yeah, I like that. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, just sorry, one other thing. So I have to come back to what my mother said about of God's power, right? And like one of the terms we use to talk about what we're doing in the Shema is that we say we're Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim, that we are accepting the, gosh, how does people translate it? The yoke of the sovereignty of heaven, something like that, right? So if what we're doing in Shema is accepting on ourselves like God's sovereignty, his power in the world, then that also makes sense, right? All of these are examples of God's power in the world, that God continuously sort of making creation possible each day, and also all these examples that we just gave of master of battles, acts of righteousness. They're all showing God's power in the world, perhaps through us, as the direction that we're just going in now. That God shows his power through how he operates through operating through us. Yeah, Nancy.
So I don't know what the word is. I'm torn because I'm confused, I guess is a better word, because growing up, I always learned that, at the end of the story of the Torah, Moses, people are given the choice, making their own choices, and people choose bad as well as good, and so that we create our own evil, and God really is not the creator of the evil, the way I always was taught.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a totally turnaround of everything that I've learned or believed.
I don't know what it means that God, right, but God is creating that choice. You know what I'm saying?
Right, exactly. But we ultimately make that choice.
We are maybe ultimately responsible for it. Right. What does it mean that God creates evil? It's like a very hard question.
Yeah.
God's creating that option, right? He's not choosing evil, right? Or not doing evil, right?
Yes,
but maybe like to look at it as God creates that space in the world, right? Like if you look at like the Kabbalistic idea that God is like contracting in the world to make space for humans, he's choosing to contract, to step back and give us that choice, right?
Right.
So it's not right. It's not maybe that God is doing the evil, right? In the way,
right? Exactly. He's not creating
that using the different verbs. Like it's not that God's forming evil or making evil, but he's like making space for evil. Susan, good to see your face. Yeah,
yeah.
Susan Yitzhak, yeah.
I want to say that we're kind of skipping over that we should also pay attention to the last part, that there's like this future, like we've been describing. The tefillah has been describing God's powers and what he does and stuff like that, but the ending sort of refers back to the beginning of he'll shine a new light on Zion. So wait a minute, we're just talking about, God's powers and how he's one and he does all these things, and all of a sudden we enter into this request,
Yeah.
Not exactly clear what this new light is, but
yeah, not totally clear what this new light is, but it seems to be a request that, that we're going in the direction of light, shine a new light on Zion, and may we all soon be privileged to enjoy its brightness, right? There are different Kabbalistic explanations of what's going on here, but I think ultimately it's saying like, let us enjoy light, like that this is let history be going in that direction, which is also really important, and also, right, and is a request, so it's interesting, like in the context, it's interesting, because the rest is not, the rest of the paragraph is not a request, but it's like, once we're blessing God for creating light, we have to, it's like we almost like have to stick in, like also, and please let us be moving in that direction. And that's it's a very important point. That line is very interesting in context. Okay, we're running out of time here. So I do want to also talk about the second blessing. We're really running out of time. But so Rabbi Ezra Bick from Yeshivat Har Etzion talks about basically he talks about this point that Ellen, the first thing that Ellen mentioned, the first theme, which was this idea that God is constantly enabling creation. And not only that, like what example, like the question he asks is like, what example do we give of creation? Is this changing between light and darkness, the changing of the guard, like he calls it. So he says like that, one must claim the sages based this blessing on the changing of the guard of light and darkness rather than on the light itself, right? We could have just blessed God for light, for creating light, as we do at the very end, blessed are you, Hashem, former of the luminaries, because the renewal of nature every day is experientially more moving and more impressive, and hence more able to elicit a deep response. There's a difference between the existence of nature, static and immutable since creation, and the dynamic, ever-changing present picture of nature that we experience when we awake in the morning. And that difference is the immediacy of God's presence. The blessing is not about creation per se, but about God's presence within creation, a presence we face daily. It's not God, the creator, but God, the king, the ruler, who rolls it's about the power, right? God is the ruler who rolls the darkness away and who raises up the sun and shines it upon us every day, always. When you recite the Shema, when you declare his majesty, it is not an affirmation of metaphysical truth, but a response to being in his majestic presence. The dynamism of nature reflects God's power or his goodness or his presence before us. And that is an experience which will lead to Kabbalat Olam Chut Shemayim in a few minutes. So this is like going in a different direction, right? That, not exactly different, but slightly different, that when do we most feel God's presence, right? He talks about it earlier. Like you could say, like, really, you should feel God's like God's as much present in a tree as he is in the sunset or the sunrise. But it's more easy for humans to feel God's presence in the sunrise or the sunset. And if this blessing is ultimately sort of preparing us to be fully present, right? Like we talked about in the beginning, to be fully present for God and to sense God's presence, then that's why we talk about the sunrise and sunset, because it's not about just like acknowledging that God's creator, but it's about sensing God's presence in nature. And we might even add, like going in terms of the different themes that we've been talking about, that I don't know. I'm just thinking about this now, but maybe somehow also the sort of interplay between good and evil could also somehow be a way of sensing God's presence as not sort of static and immutable, but and our fight against evil, right? To sense something in that struggle we can also sense God's presence. 4 more minutes. I'm trying to decide what to do here. Okay. All right. Well, you know what? I think we'll leave the next. I think we'll leave Avarava for next time. The second blessing we'll do next time. But I wanted to just to sort of sum up the themes that we've been talking about and how we see them in the Shema. I want to actually end with talking about the Shema itself and seeing how these themes that we've been talking about come into the Shema. So I'll end with these last sources about the Shema, and then we'll go back. It's going to be a little bit going backwards, but we'll talk about the second blessing and the blessing after next time. But just to think about like what we've been saying. So Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad got written. What are we saying? We sometimes translate it as "Hear, O Israel," right? That's like one of the classic translations. "Hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God. Hashem is one." But Shema is really not here, right? So Sforno says, Shema Yisrael, what does that really mean? It means listen, Israel, with your mind open. And Rabbi Avi Weiss says, the more appropriate translation of the word Shema is listen rather than hear. There's a great difference between the two. Hear is superficial, the words do not penetrate. Listen means to integrate, to take in, to ingest the words being said. A husband and wife, for example, often hear each other, but do not listen to each other. In the Shema, we pray that Israel listen, not just hear, as the oneness of God is declared. So this really comes back, right, to what we were talking about even in the very beginning, right, about really, really listening to God and having the sense that God's listening to us and being like sort of fully present in that relationship. And also like to incorporate what we've been talking about, right, to feel God's presence in all these different, in the dark, in the night, in the good, in the evil. And just to sum up a little bit, how to connect back to what we've been talking about, Ruth Messenger from the American Jewish World Service says, again, Parshat Elchanan includes the words of the Shema, a prayer so important that many Jews recite it twice a day. Our sages are explicit when we recite the Shema, we must do so with focus, with clarity, and with unity of heart and mind. The essence of the Shema, the imperative to really listen, to pay attention to injustice, and to mend the brokenness in our world, grounds my life with purpose. The difference between hearing and listening is paying attention, finding and living that elusive element of real connection to the stranger or the other. So I wanted to bring this source because she again makes this connection that if we can really listen and be present in prayer and with God, and we can also feel God's presence in all these things, that ultimately that should help us develop the ability to listen to suffering in the world, to pay attention to injustice, to mend the brokenness, and right, and to like really to listen to the other, and like going back to Heschel, that will ultimately inspire us to act against the evil, to act against the injustice, and to mend the brokenness in our world. So I will end with that blessing to all of us, that we can cultivate the ability to really, really listen to the other, to people suffering, to people who are victims of injustice, and that will inspire us to act. And that ultimately prayer can help us do all these things. So I'm going to end now, since it's 10 o'clock and I'm very aware of the time. We'll do the blessing before and after next time. But I am still here if anyone has questions or comments.
All right. I just wanted to say first, thank you to everyone for sharing and talking, and thank you to Ms. Schultz. And I want to highlight 2 upcoming classes as part of Drisha's Falls On. First, tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Drisha's weekly Parsha class. Discussions on the Parsha continues this week with Rabbi John Kelson. Mishnah learning continues with Rabbi Silver teaches on Mishnah Yomi, specifically Yevamot. This will take place on Sunday morning at 1 p.m. Eastern, and you can find out about more of our fall classes at 5784.drisha.org/fall, and I'm just posting the link to that in the chat. And thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you next week.
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah,
Take
if
care.
anyone had questions or comments that I didn't get to, you're welcome to say them.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Rachel. Very
Thank you,
inspiring.
everyone, for sharing.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Right.
Do you have a few minutes, Rachel?
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things that are bothering me. I guess it's just the source number 10, I guess it's just that Rabbi Bick says this, that it's that it's God the King, and as opposed to God the Creator. I mean, is there any support, or is that rabbi's interpretation?
So I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to explain how is it connected to the Shema, right? And the Shema, if we look at it as Kabbalat Omer Zechut Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven, right? Then it's sort of accepting God as, and king is maybe not the best metaphor, but as ruler, right? As ruler, as powerful, sovereign in the world. So I think that's where he's going, and like he's trying to show what the connection is, and his proof of that is that we're not just talking about creation here. We're not just talking about, oh, the world is beautiful and God created it and that's it. We're talking about like what you pointed out, like how God is present, how God's like every moment needs to be creating the world, and specifically like he talks about the changing of light to darkness, like the morning and the night, right? When the darkness changes to light and the light changes to darkness, that is like showing God as powerful. In other words, it's not just God creates the world and then the world is beautiful and he steps back, right? But he's like all the time active and powerful.
I don't know if it's just the 21st century sensibility. I'm just much more comfortable with God as creator, God as sustainer. I've never been comfortable. I mean, mostly it comes up on the high holidays. God is king. That's not something that resonates at all.
Well, we don't, right? Because kings doesn't resonate so much with us now, right?
Yeah,
I mean, maybe you can live in England and have a king, but like the idea, I think, of a king is like not a relationship that we connect to so much right now. You know what I'm saying? In our day and age, you could look at it maybe as like God as like I said, like God is powerful, God is intervening in the, as opposed to king. Like I think a king, it's a hard metaphor for us. Or actually we'll see. But my next class, I want to talk about different, now we have some other things we didn't finish up from this class, but I want to talk about like different metaphors of like the God person relationship and specific and how they express themselves in prayer. And like, that's one of the questions I want to talk about, like your exact question, like which metaphor do we connect to? In other words, it is, I think for a lot of people, hard to connect to today. The metaphor is God as king, but maybe there are some things we can take from it, but yeah.
And the other piece that's so profoundly disturbing forever today, and when we think about that we're supposed to model ourselves after God, and that's how, I mean, it seems to be such a cognitive dissonant disconnect in Heschel's piece that, prayer is supposed to be subversive. It's supposed to be what's a word now that disruptive, and it's supposed to, like the shofar, wake us up and rock us and get us moving. And that last line is, the world is dark to me. It would be hopeless. I would be Kohelet if I didn't have faith that despite the fact that God is utterly silent, I believe that God is listening. And that utter silence is so profoundly disturbing. And that can't be the role model. That can't be the what we're aspiring to and our, so that I'm having trouble. I had trouble hearing the rest of the class through that.
The idea that God is silent, yet prayer, the contrast you're saying, like, God's silence is a big problem in and of itself, right? It's
not a hall pass, but it's such a huge stumbling block. It's so hard to go around it. It makes everything so much more difficult. It's there. It's reality, and it's disturbing.
Right. And how do we move from there to overthrowing the forces that continue to destroy the promise, the hope, and the vision? Is what you're saying?
Yes.
How do we go from? He's saying God is silent, yet he listens to us. Like, I think he's,
God listens.
What? It's faith. Right.
Heschel isn't saying God listens. Heschel's saying, I have faith that God listens.
And that makes it bearable somehow.
That's why I can get up in the morning.
Yeah. And that's why I can keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah.
Also,
it's beautiful from Heschel's point of view. It's problematic from the God. Anyway, thank you very much. This was
it's
beautiful.
Hard. I don't have any, don't have all the,
You brought it, and I'm very grateful.
Challenging,
Gonna have to end this, but thank you for sticking around, and everyone should have a good night.
Thanks, Alan, for your comments and for sharing, and
Okay. Wish you well this week.
All right, take care. Okay, bye.